Presented by Bain Capital.
Welcome to Mindmine Mondays, a special conversation series with thought leaders from diverse fields, where we catch up with them to discuss the emerging realities of our times and their impact on our present and our future. Today, our focus is on living with the novel coronavirus, a virus that's not going away from our lives anytime soon. So, in that sense, how should nations, businesses, citizens, and societies adapt and adjust? This conversation is an initiative of the Mindmine Institute, an independent think tank that has been set up by Hero Enterprise. So let me welcome my first guest for today, Sunil Kant Munjal, the chairman of Hero Enterprise. Mr. Munjal, thanks very much for joining us today. Always a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mridu. And you're right when you say this is an issue which is facing us right now. We've been in the middle of this virus now for the last some months. Different parts of the world have taken a different trajectory. We went off into this like a manned space flight, not knowing where we are going. Clearly, we are finding that the re-entry is the difficult one now. And we have had challenges. The global institutions have not been able to get people to think alike. Even the G20 and G7 have not been able to come on a common platform to discuss the kind of revival package that is required by the world. WHO itself has been accused of getting politically motivated. So it is an issue which is facing us squarely. And from the tightest lockdown in India to countries which had no lockdown, we've had every kind of experience shown across the world. We find ourselves in a situation where we are planning now gradually to get out of this lockdown. But the reality is that this virus is here to stay, at least for anywhere from a year to 2 years in the future, and maybe to some extent in the long-term future as well. So how do we tackle this? How do we live with this? What is it that we need to do and must not do? To discuss this, we have an expert panel here today. We have Sandip. Sandip Patel is the MD and Asia head of IBM. IBM is providing a lot of the firepower for thinking and data management on how we can actually tackle this. We also have with us Ambassador Malka, Ambassador of Israel to India, who is not just an academic, a diplomat, but also an economist in his own right. We also have the head of SBI's mutual funds, Navneet Munot, who is an authority on how financing takes place and how industries and companies behave in normal circumstances. It would be interesting to hear from each one of them what they believe is the current right behavior for us as nations, as individuals, as institutions and corporations. This is in a series where we've discussed all aspects of this with experts already, from RBI governors to corporate heads, to think tanks, to academics. So I'm going to hand it back to Mridu to anchor this for us, because we do this in partnership with CNBC. So thank you to CNBC for this partnership. Thank you to the wonderful panelists we have on this, and to the moderator. Back to you, Mridu.
Welcome, everyone. So let's jump right into the topic, living with the virus. And Ambassador Malka, if I can come to you first. Israel has managed to somewhat contain the first wave of COVID-19. I'd like to know from you, as you resume business and life now to a large extent, what are some of the new protocols that you are putting in place from the government for the civil society at large? What are the specific 2 or 3 things that Israel is doing to ensure that the next wave of COVID-19 doesn't hit it?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me. Well, as you well mentioned, and as Mr. Munjal well mentioned, Israel overcame this first wave of the pandemic, and now we got full control on the infection curve. We just informed that today there were no more diagnosed positive in Israel in COVID-19. So once we realize that we have full control on the infection curve, we now start to understand what should be our exit strategy and how we are going to conduct our deeds and actions in the future, in the coming future, still under the threat of the COVID-19. So what we basically do is relaxing gradually all the restrictions that we implemented during the pandemic outbreak. We were one of the first countries to do that. And now we are doing it gradually and always monitoring the infection curve to see if what we do is not in some way making the infection curve rise. And we have some limits, timelines that we are following, and it's kind of trial and error. So what we now do is bring back education. The education system is full functioning now under some guidelines that are related to the COVID-19. So students come with masks, they study in classes with open windows, we have public transportation with, again, these guidelines that should be established after this COVID-19. We are following that, and since we have a system of tracing of contacts, so everyone that is infected, we can trace backwards and see where he was infected to understand where are the leaks that we have and then fix them. So it's a trial and error, always relaxing more, monitoring the infection curve, and that's how we know what infects the infection curves. And that's why this is the way that we are going to go back to the new normal, as it's called now, always with full control on the process.
Right. All right. So, so you are saying that students are beginning to go back to campuses. You are somewhat resuming public transportation, of course, with caution. Now, Sandip, if I can bring you in, we are in lockdown 4.0, which is relatively more relaxed as compared to the earlier phases of the lockdowns. But as people start moving more and more, as there is increased contact between people, and that is going to happen in a country like India, where the population density is so high, contact tracing is perhaps going to get more tough over the next couple of months if this continues. So what role will technology really play in helping us live with the virus through the pandemic, whether it's prevention, whether it's keeping our elders safe, whether it's contact tracing? Where else is technology going to help us get better and deal with the virus?
So let me talk about, I think, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I think very relevant topics for our time. Let me talk about technology in slightly different context. You know, I fundamentally believe that, you know, technology is serving as a unifying force, you know, in many respects, a sutradhar, if you will, as we navigate through these shifting paradigms amongst this global, you know, crisis that we are all dealing with. And in this, the impact of many emerging technologies like cloud, like artificial intelligence, that is going to become more and more relevant. And I see this in three specific areas. One, it is powering a whole new work paradigm. I think the way we have pivoted completely to work from home, you know, enabling people to sort of get connected, form virtual networks, that I think entirely is a huge move forward. Second, I think, which is what you're sort of starting to touch on, is how do we drive innovation for the greater good? Be it, you know, making high-powered computing and supercomputing capability available to study the dependence and structure of dynamics of this virus, and how we use it to drive prevention, categorization, and drug designing aspects. That is one example of it. Another very live example of it is clearly the Arogya Setu Act that our government has launched, which enables people to you know, be careful about who they are interacting with. It keeps tracking, monitoring of where people are moving. And then the other aspect, which is very similar, right, is some of the work that is happening with artificial intelligence in the form of chatbots. So, for example, you know, some work that we've been doing with the Indian Council of Medical Research in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, we have implemented a Watson assistant that is built by IBM on ICMR portal to respond to specific queries of the frontline staff and data entry operators from various testing facilities across the country. And this is actually enabling people to stay a lot more up to speed. This is, again, think about this as trusted data at the fingertips of citizens, health experts, and healthcare workers. So I think this is the second area which is really important. And the third area is new business models that are emerging all over the place. Particularly, one very specific example I will give you is with telecom operators and the communication service providers. We have just made some announcements with Bharti Airtel and Vodafone, where they are moving to a vertically integrated hybrid cloud environment, which is going to enable them to really redefine, leverage technologies like 5G, like edge computing, and redefine how businesses operate, speeding innovation. It's creating better user experiences and fundamentally improving overall employee and customer engagement, which is also enabling them to start to think about new revenue models, which are going to be very relevant in the world within COVID and post-COVID, such as highly differentiated B2B services like gaming, remote media production, enterprise services, etc.
Yes, absolutely, Sandip. And gaming has indeed taken off really well during the lockdowns. And I'm going to come back to you on those new revenue models very soon. But bringing in Navneet at this point in time, Navneet, living with the virus also means that we have to start taking care of the economy. As India looks to reboot its investments, how are investors really looking at companies during and beyond the pandemic? Has there been a significant shift in the way they evaluate opportunities? What is the prime focus going to be on?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And as Mr. Munjal mentioned in the beginning, that the focus is shifting now from survival only to revival also. While the fundamental tenets of investing, they don't change. But at the same time, we have to take into account the new normal. There is so much of uncertainty on the horizon in the near term, as well as some of the longer term implications from this crisis on consumer behavior, on policy, on technological changes that Sandip talked about, and some of the other geopolitical changes that Ambassador talked about. I think we'll have to take into account all of those. And I think one of the important aspects when we are looking at a business is to see the resilience. Resilience in terms of the balance sheet, their liquidity, and the resilience which is built into the business. How are they going to live through this crisis, and how do they rebuild or reimagine themselves for building the business on the other side of this crisis? I think adaptability, nimbleness, agility, I think those are going to be a lot more important. We're talking about so many of these uncertainty where there are so many unknowns. From a risk management perspective, any amount of scenario planning will always leave the scope for something which you cannot even plan out today. And that's why building that flexibility, building those feedback loops into the management systems is very, very critical. One other thing, taking the point from Sandip, I would like to reiterate that every cost will have to be reimagined in this world. But the two costs, particularly on the innovation and technology, must be expanded. I think organizations will have to innovate a lot more, will have to invest a lot more on technology to come out stronger on the other side of this crisis. And the last piece I would add, I mean, of course, there are other aspects related to technology, because then newer risks are likely to emerge as you start working from home, start doing that. But the one last half a minute, Ridu, is I think that on the sustainability aspect, in this crisis, how do you deal with all the stakeholders, your suppliers, I mean, the vendors, your customers, your lenders, your shareholders, I mean, particularly the employees, all the stakeholders. I think that will decide the businesses that will not only survive this crisis, but will come out stronger.
Right, absolutely. All right, great, fascinating insights you gave us there, Navneet. Mr. Munjal, manufacturing, education, healthcare, these are some of the areas that you're interested and invested in. Let me begin with manufacturing first. While we are talking of Industry 4.0 in India at this point in time, we're talking of accelerating automation and leveraging emerging technologies on a big scale. Do you think the pace of these things is going to catch up now? Because we will have to live in a world where physical distancing is our reality for the next couple of years. And will even micro and small enterprises have to invest significantly in the health of their people as well as the sanitation of their premises on a regular basis?
So 2 or 3 things are happening at the same time. One, that the shutdown that we had in majority of the manufacturing industry because the only part which is left open was pharmaceutical or anything connected to essential services, maybe to food delivery, etc., or food processing. Everything else actually came to a stop. Now, they've also lost a lot of their unskilled and semi-skilled labor because of the migration that has taken place over the last few weeks. So one thing that is currently facing the companies is the inability to restart fully because their entire value chain is not either in a green zone or has not started up, which is the dealers, the distributors, the manufacturing, the suppliers, the supply chain partners, all of it. So that is one big challenge being faced. But every company right now is working rapidly internally to see how they can bring more use of technology into their business, how they can work with a higher efficiency and a lower cost model. So you're right, some of the work will get accelerated. Many companies were already toying with the idea of bringing technology into manufacturing. And manufacturing 4.0 at this moment in India was only a conversation in large companies. Now it's started being discussed in companies of every size at the same time. I hope that the phased opening will allow manufacturing to open in the large enough quantum for them to be meaningfully deploying the resources and also to start to break even, because the other challenge here is going to be to have enough of a cash flow in these companies to not just to keep them open, but to keep them afloat as well. Because that's the one big concern the companies are now grappling with at this moment.
Right. All right. And Ambassador Malka, if I can also talk to you about the new normal that diplomacy is going to go through now while we deal with the pandemic and beyond it. How has the COVID-19 outbreak really changed diplomatic relations between nations? Is the focus on multilateralism greater than it ever was before? And just to add on to that, also, I'd like to perhaps know, is this whole conduct of diplomatic events that has gone a sea change going to be there for good? For instance, we've had démarches being served over the telephone. We've had envoys presenting their credentials to foreign governments over video conferencing. Do you think some of these things are going to be there for good?
Well, first of all, in the broader perspective, I think much of which we are going to see in the future, it will be the outcome of the way that we conduct our deeds and actions today. Because under this pandemic, which is a threat to the world as a global, we can see nations that work together, cooperate, and help each other. And we can see another process that happened of countries and states that just start getting distant from each other. So much of how we are going to conduct and make decisions today and work together today, support each other within the nation community will much affect the way that the future will look like. So hopefully our leaders will take the right decisions and actions and cooperate and work together. I think it's a good opportunity to enhance and foster ties between nations.
Right, great opportunity indeed, and we'll come back to how that opportunity is being utilized by different nations. But Sandip, this pandemic has also made us, of course, it has made us embrace technology in a large fashion, but it has also opened up doors to threats, cybersecurity threats, data theft threats, privacy threats like never before. So can you enlighten us on what sort of threats have increased during the pandemic, and at a global level, do you believe that perhaps cyber warfare could be the next big threat that the world should watch out for?
There will be a new equilibrium for sure. So there will be new threats, and there are some other threats that will be emerge and even foster. So the way that we should deal with them is, of course, cooperating. And as we see now, things that we started even before the outbreak of the COVID-19, harnessing technology to the way that we conduct our deeds and actions is now just, I'd say, accelerating under this COVID-19 crisis. We now realize that we can work from distance, negotiate from distance. We can, of course, educate, share, cooperate in technology and other areas from distance. we can use distant medical treatment. The thing we talked before before this crisis emerged, but then now it's all these processes are accelerated, and we are now understanding how much we can use and harness this technology in order to conduct the relations and to foster them in the future. But saying that, I think that the nature of human will not change. We are social animals. So I make a distinction between the time until we find a vaccine and the population of the world will be immune with good medicine, effective medicine to the COVID-19 and after that. Because until this vaccine, we have to conduct our businesses differently. And as I said, using more and more technology for remote and other kinds of managing relations, negotiations. But after that, I think people will come to nature. That's what happened in the last crisis and pandemics that humanity saw in the past. So after that, I think people will come back to their nature. And of course,
Ambassador, I'll also like to Sandip. I'll also like to ask Sandip to weigh in on the cyber security threat. Sandip, how increased is our threat during the pandemic?
So Mridu, look, it has increased. It has increased. So I'll give you one data point. We have a group called IBM X-Force that actually observes threats, cybersecurity threats around the world. And we have observed a 4,300% increase in coronavirus-related spam globally. Cyber criminals are using this outbreak to drive their business. They know that everyone is connecting, remotely online. And so even things like virus-themed sales of malware assets on the dark web and virus-related discount codes, etc., that is a fact of life. But that said, I don't believe that anyone should deter from taking the digital route, because I think there is an onus on technology and technology providers that we have to deliver technology and applications of technology with trust. Trust that it will work with reliability, trust that data and privacy will be protected, and trust that connectivity is secure. So the onus is on us to drive, I call it good tech. And good tech is empowering health services. The points that the ambassador was making, I think good tech is empowering health services, education, payments, emotional well-being, and just keeping people connected so that both their health is monitored, but also their emotional and mental well-being is served by staying connected, through this pandemic.
Right. Absolutely. Well, we are completely timed out on the television edition of this conversation. Thank you very much for joining us here today. We'll be back next time with Mindmine Mondays. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.
Presented by Bain Capital.